You're tuning in to Radio Moobies, a special event podcast in collaboration between the Explosion Network, The Pop Culturist, and Dash Culture. Each week, we'll be discussing the films from the Kevin Smith film series, Askew universe, our memories with them, why we love them, and preparing ourselves for the upcoming Jay and Silent Bob reboot. My name is Dylan Blight, and joining me from The Pop Culturist is Ryan Betson.
Nooch.
And from Dash Culture, Buddy Watson.
Adventure, excitement. A Jedi craves not these things.
Yes, good. Very good, very good. You're sitting there so like, I was like, wonder what he's going to say, but yeah, okay,
You make me rethink. I kind of fucked up with the nooch.
You can't fuck up with the nooch. That's some life advice there. Today we're talking about Mallrats, my personal favorite Askew film, but also the most critically panned one. For the sake of the show, we'll be presuming that you have watched the movie, and we will be talking with full spoilers. So if you haven't watched it, pause now, go watch it. It's a great movie. Come back. So when was everyone's first time that they watched Mallrats? For me, it was the second Askew movie I watched after Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. And I think the only reason, because I looked them up or whatever, and the reason I picked this one out of all of them was because of the poster cover or the DVD cover or what have you. It looked the most fun, you know? It looked the most... Chasing Amy looks like a no offense to Chasing Amy. I really like Chasing Amy, and we'll get to that film, obviously, eventually here. But that film's cover, boring. No, thank you. Dogma, that looks like a horror movie or something to me when I first looked at something. I wasn't sure what Dogma was supposed to be. I had no idea because it's like the angel wings and stuff. I'm like, no, thank you. Over there, I don't want that. Clerks, black and white, went over that last week. So Mallrats was where we were headed for this. Clerks 2 wasn't out at this time. Well, maybe I would have picked Clerks 2 because that front cover is actually quite exciting. It's like you got a bunch of people and they're like, yeah, we work at a store. But so the first time I watched Clerks was, as I said last week when I started watching these, probably around 15, 16, whatever it was. Watched this, absolutely fell in love with these characters. And to this day, I've always, and this may happen one day, and hopefully if I say it here, it'll happen eventually. I've always wanted to do on the Explosion Network, like force myself to actually sit down and be like, here is my top 10 movies or whatever it is. Because I often, whenever people ask me, I'm like, oh, this is in there somewhere, which Mallrats in my mind is top 5 movies for me. But I've never actually sat down to do the list properly because I've never really had a reason to. And the only way I'd ever do it properly is if I was making a video or an article or something like that. So, but Mallrats to me is top 5 movies, which when I say to people, they're like, you're crazy. I know a lot of people consider it one of the weaker ones of the series here and stuff. And as I said before, I know critically it's considered one of the weaker ones. But to me, I gravitated towards it. I want to talk about this a little bit more so you get your guys' opinions on as well. But I gravitated towards it a lot because the characters just felt so real, and they didn't feel like people I knew because they were like older than I was at the time I was watching it. But they kind of, I guess the easiest way to explain it is they felt like people I did know, but older or something. They felt like people I could know when I was older. They felt like kind of people I wish I could be friends with at that age I was as a teenager, and they could be my cool older friends or something like that, you know? So I just really, really love the characters. And obviously this film is the first film I ever watched. And we talked about this last week's episode as well, a bit about like pop culture references and these sorts of things. But this was the first film I watched where it was chock full of pop culture references. And this is, I think, Kevin Smith's most full film of pop culture references and stuff. And I'd never seen this before. I thought it was like watching a new genre nearly, you know, like I had action movies, horror movies, family movies and stuff. I'd seen all this stuff. I'd never seen a movie so full of pop culture references. We get it fucking everywhere these days. It's not as exciting to kids these days, I guess, but at the time it was super exciting for me. Buddy, when is the first time you watched it, and what's your like overview feelings towards Mallrats?
I totally agree about your assessment there with the pop culture references. I really feel that this is almost like the birth of pop culture references in movies. And I say that with kind of, you know, with not much reference before that with pop culture references. You know, there might have been a lot of fourth wall breaking or pop culture references thrown in movies before this, but I really feel like this is the one, and Kevin Smith in particular is the one that really popularized that and made that a bit more mainstream. For me, my first experience with this movie is quite interesting. I think it's probably, I get my first job 2002. I think that would be year 10? Year 9, I would have got my first job. 2001, starting getting disposable income. Easy DVD opens up maybe the next year at the mall. Oh, at the mall, Jesus Christ. At the shopping center. And I'm pretty sure Mallrats is the first ever DVD I buy for myself.
For an overpriced, like $30 or something?
Probably, yeah. I wouldn't be surprised. It might have been $20. And I have really I can't remember why I purchased it. I think I was with someone at the time that was kind of spruiking Kevin Smith, and I was a bit not really nonchalant about it at the time, telling me that Mallrats was great. I think might have been John Gilmore, who was quite astute with that kind of stuff. Yeah, and he kind of pushed me that way, so I ended up getting that. And I used to buy DVDs every week, and that's kind of when I started really.
So did I. That was a time.
Yeah,
I loved it. I loved going to Easy DVD on a Thursday night and getting. I used to get like 2 or 3 each week and kind of just build my collection from there. And I was very and I always hide a lot of movies from video rental places like Video Easy or Blockbuster or something like that. All through growing up with Nan and Pop and etc. But this is like finally my time, and I was quite brash as well. I would purchase a lot of stuff that I had really no idea about, other than like reading the cover or reading down in the bottom credits, like, oh shit, or that splashed something on the thing, like from the from the producer, or which now I know means
from
fucking
two of the
nothing.
Two of the 6 guys who created Scary Movie.
Yeah, that's right. From the director or the writer, or those had more credence, and I was a little bit more naive then. But Mallrats was that movie for me, and I actually think I sit with you, Dylan, as well. Mallrats is my favorite Kevin Smith movie, period, I think. It's a tough one. It kind of sits up there with the one that I rate second, which I think we're going to be talking about next week, which is Chasing Amy, or the week after. But I think Mallrats takes it, and just because of all that pop culture references. And I feel like the movie is so quotable. Rewatching it the other day, it just feels like one of those movies that you do a watch along with.
Oh, I would love to do one of those cinema, like they put on a screening, fans all come along, and then people are just sitting there like, quoting the lines and whatever else, that sort of fun screenings that they do. I would love to go to something like that for this movie. That would be an absolute dream.
Yeah.
Ryan, what's your memories? What's your first time you've watched Mallrats?
See, Mallrats was one of the later ones that I watched. It would have been probably in the late 2000s. I remember enjoying it at the time. I'm not on the same boat as you guys. It is not my favorite Kevin Smith movie. It's probably top 3, but it is not my number 1.
Buddhist man.
Yeah, look, Mallrats is certainly good, but I think it's a movie that has aged with me. Like, I enjoyed it at the time, but as I watch it now, I enjoy it so much more.
What do you reckon it was about when you watched it in the first place that didn't connect with you then that you find better now then?
I would say it's the pop culture references. Back then, I didn't read comic books. I didn't know all this shit. So a lot of it, landed on deaf ears.
It's impossible. Lois could never have Superman's baby. Do you think her fallopian tubes can handle his sperm? I guarantee he blows a load like a shotgun right through her back. What about her womb? Do you think it's strong enough to carry his child?
Sure, why not?
He's an alien, for Christ's sake. His Kryptonian biological makeup is enhanced by Earth's yellow sun. If Lois gets a tan, the kid could kick right through her stomach.
I find it funny, the idea of someone being like, the pop culture references from 1990s, I got them 20 years later, and now I understand the pop culture references.
Well, because growing up in country Victoria, like, comic books weren't an option. They weren't a thing. They couldn't be purchased where I lived. So I knew of like Spider-Man and like the X-Men and whatnot, but not to the level that they mentioned here. So they did kind of fall short in that way. But obviously, like, Jaws and all that sort of stuff was still certainly relevant. But yeah, as I've gotten older, enjoyed it thoroughly. I do think it's better than Clerks pretty much across the board. Just in terms of how it's acted. Like, I understand that, Clerks is the first film that he did, but it's very stilted and sometimes a little bit tough to watch because of the delivery. But with Mallrats, it's tight. Like, Jason Lee is dope in it. Like, Jay has finally worked out the character of Jay. It's just awesome, and it's wacky and it's silly, and I really enjoy it.
Yeah, it's I'll get back to the wacky and silly bit because I think it's actually his most wacky and silly film. But what is everyone's favorite moment, line, or scene from this movie? Then mine is the never-ending quoting line and scene
It's
of
remarkable. That's criminal. That kid is back on the escalator again. Leave it alone. What?
like I will say randomly
Yep.
at times
Yep.
for no reason. Sometimes it's just kind of. Much like Snoochie Boochies, which is, and like people will be like, what's that mean? It's like, oh, it means it's cool, I guess. Like it has no meaning. Like I will say that kid is back on the escalator, but I say elevator because country differences, I guess. I've adapted it. I'll yell that out sometimes randomly around people who have no idea what I'm talking about. They'll be like, what? Like I've been sitting in the mall with people, watch the kid get on one, and be like, that kid is making like, what are you talking about? Like, from Mallrats. What? Like,
I do it all the time. All the time I do that.
Yeah, you need to respect the escalator. That one comes out a lot.
Hope his pants get caught in a bloodbath and shoes. What has got in with you today?
I've had it. It's actually really relatable because I remember as a kid, my mum told me that would happen.
Yeah.
She was like, if you sit down on this, your leg could get caught and you could get your leg broken. Or something should say. Like, she'd tell us off for trying to sit down and stuff. So I remember the first time I watched it, always reminded me of that. But yeah, that is, I mean, here's the thing with this movie. I wasn't going to bother trying to list any more than my number one favorite because then I could be like, well, let's tell him Steve Dave, which obviously is now a podcast, and like Comic Book Men, they've got their own show now and everything like that. So it's like, there's a never ending list of most quotable lines from this movie because it is simply the most quotable, I think. So I'm just going to stick with my one. But what is your one, buddy? And you can't steal mine.
Breakfast Schmeckfest. Look at the score, for Christ's sake. It's only the second period. I'm up 12-2. Breakfast come and go, Renee.
Now Hartford, the whale.
Hey,
they only beat Vancouver once, maybe twice in a lifetime.
One, the thing that always got me about that scene the most is the fact that he fucking couldn't find that controller. It's like,
but that's so real. Like mornings when you wake up and you're like, where the fuck's the controller?
Yeah, maybe these days it's fucking wireless. I'm like, it's wired, dude. Come on, just look at where the cord's going.
He actually picks up a controller from the side table, and then he reaches down to the bed to pick up another controller.
Oh.
I'm like, what?
Not two here.
How? Who's playing with the other controller? Why have you got two controllers there? What are you fucking farming trophies?
Yeah, maybe these days. Yeah, well, that's that was like the first. Considering that's like not the first scene in the movie, but like it's the second scene in the movie, I guess. It's like that was the first like pure line of Kevin Smith dialogue, I think, in the movie. Because all the stuff prior to this is like, it doesn't scream Kevin Smith dialogue, like a boyfriend and a girlfriend being like, oh, blah, blah. Well, hold on. I'll put a pause in that because the fact that someone swam laps and then died, that is Kevin Smith dialogue.
She's fucking dead?
Yeah, she's fucking dead. Which, also side note on that, fuck it, I'll bring it up here. We'll come back to it because I want to talk about the interconnected universes. But it's like every time I watch this movie now, it just does my head in how they mention here it's like she's fucking dead and all this sort of stuff. It's like that's the girl who's the funeral, which is mentioned in fucking Clerks and stuff. It's like it's so. I always wonder if people realized it back in the day, but yeah, it's like that is a good line. It's very straight up Kevin Smith dialogue. Is what that is, like the whale, and especially because it's hockey. It's like hockey. Kevin Smith.
Yeah.
Kevin Smith wishes he was born in Canada. Is the
Absolutely.
secret. Ryan, what's your go-to for this one?
Like the back of a Volkswagen?
And I use that to fuck them someplace fairly uncomfortable.
What, like the back of a Volkswagen?
No?
I use that probably at least once every 2 weeks. And to this day, no one, like anytime someone mentions mild discomfort, I'm like, oh yeah, the back of a Volkswagen. Like what? Mate, don't worry about it.
I saw, no joke, I was looking through, I can't remember who it was. Someone posted a picture on Twitter, right? Some like cosplay or something. And I was looking through the comments. And of course, there's always those couple of people who post like inappropriate things. Like, I'd just love to fuck, that sort of shit.
Yeah.
And someone literally wrote, like, I would love to fuck you in a place you would like, or something like that. And this was only today, and it was so funny because I'm like, we're recording this podcast today. Someone replied, like, what, like the back of a Volkswagen? I was like, dude, I fucking, yeah. I was like, I will pay that. That is good. Like, and you always wonder if the person even would have understood what that person was saying. It was like, what? I don't know. But I was like, I will pay that. That is fucking great. But that is, yeah, that's classic. Where it's like that line you can take to a lot of things, and you can say to a lot of people, they may not know what you're talking about or referencing unless they've actually watched the movie. So it works out quite well. Like, you can make inappropriate jokes, but no one will know what you're
I think this is one of my most quotable movies. This is the one I bring up the most, for sure. And maybe because of the situations like with the escalator and, you know, you want to go out for breakfast. I'm like, you just left yourself open there, Kim. Sorry. All the other situations like that. So
breakfast, smackfast.
Well, the other one that pops up, I use sparingly, but it still makes me chuckle at least. Was I think it's at the end of the film where they show the video with Trish the Dish. She's like, she told me she was 35 or something like that.
She told me she was. Yeah, that's a weird. Even when we're watching it, I'm like, it's. I always wonder if this is one of those weird things. I always wonder how people reacted to that, like during the day, because you wouldn't know because we didn't have the internet, I guess.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that is a joke.
Like obviously, not that specific reference, but like as in the throwaway, just the unnecessary age discrepancy is the thing.
From like fucking 16 to 35 or something somehow.
Yeah. Like that level of discrepancy is where I sort of use the reference, not in specifically banging underage girls, just for clarification.
Yeah, poor Akon. You know, she was in the club. She was in the club, man. What was she supposed to do? She's in the club.
Dear. Talking about references. All right, so this is a big thing for this movie these days, and one thing I think it's impossible to not watch this these days and think about the fact that Stan Lee's in it. Stan Lee's not only mentioned in this movie, which would have been enough, you know, like they have the whole thing where it comes up. It's like, who's at the comic book store? Who's at my comic book store? You tell him, Steve Dave. Like, who the fuck is at my comic? And then like them even mentioning that Stan Lee's there signing comic books, for the time would have been like, oh, that's a like on point reference. Like they're referencing real comic book, you know, like a superstar Stan Lee or whatever, you know. And I reckon a lot of people would have paid that. But the fact that they actually have Stan Lee in it is a pretty fucking big deal because Kevin Smith invented the Stan Lee cameo, and they even reference it in the Captain Marvel movie that came out. What the fuck? Was that last year or this year? I don't even know anymore. Oh, yeah, it was right at the start of this year. Yeah, it was right at the start. Yeah, the Captain Marvel movie that came out this year, they referenced that with Stan Lee. Slight spoilers for Captain Marvel, of course, but they referenced that by having Stan Lee reading his lines for Mallrats on the train, bus, whatever the fuck they're on. I can't remember.
But yeah, like that. So it makes the Viewer's universe in the MCU. It's all canon.
Yeah,
and so I love that Stan Lee's cameo is as Stan Lee.
Yeah, it's so good. That's like such a tie back. It's like the people these days, and that's a funny thing with Stan Lee because there's several aspects, several different ways to look at it, which I quite enjoy. So the first one is that the idea. Everyone knows Stan Lee these days, you know, R.I.P. of course, but everyone knew Stan Lee. People who don't read comics know Stan Lee because of Stan Lee in the after credit scenes. Because if you're in like a friendship group of like 6 people and you go along to these Marvel movies, you love the Marvel movies, there's always going to be at least that one guy out of that friendship group who was into comics and knew to stay for the after credits, and they made you stay for the after credits, and all of a sudden you got introduced to the fact that we're watching this thing, and also you walk out the cinema and it's like, did you see the Stan Lee cameo? Did you see the Stan Lee cameo? Did you miss the Stan Lee cameo? Like everyone slowly, not the first couple movies, the Hulk and X-Men or whatever, they weren't big, but in the last couple of years of Stan Lee's life, everyone fucking knew who Stan Lee was. That was it. Every time I watched one of the Marvel movies, Stan Lee appeared, people would cheer or clap or be like, oh, like you would hear the audience like audibly like, oh, there it is, there we go. So and the other thing that always interests me about this is if they made this movie these days, the idea of Brody, the character, not recognizing Stan Lee to me is absolutely hilarious because you've got this guy who's a massive comic book aficionado, like collecting them. He's like the one part where they go to the other marketplace always makes me laugh because he's like looking for these comic books and he just like tells that lady, you should have these bordered, which always makes me laugh because when I was collecting comic books quite heavily, anytime I'd see other people's or I'd go to a comic book store and they didn't have cardboard behind them, I'd be like, fucking amateurs, like like what are you doing? You're ruining the books, Jesus Christ.
And a throwback to Clerks, I'm pretty sure he goes, you should have these borders, you savage or whatever.
Yeah. Oh, does he? Yeah, you savage. There's that line again. So the idea that this character who's such a massive comic book fan wouldn't know that's what Stan Lee looks like when he's appearing right in his face these days, or if they made this movie over the last couple of years, would have been absolutely nuts because anyone who's read comics, even fucking 10 comics in their entire life, would have known what Stan Lee looks like. That's why rewatching this movie made that scene quite funny. But yeah, it's hard to not recognize the fact that Kevin Smith invented the Stan Lee cameo. Kevin Smith invented the pop culture reference movie genre or whatever type you want to call it. And Kevin Smith also invented the Stan Lee cameo, which everyone would just note as being Marvel's thing. And we're going to talk about something else that everyone thinks Marvel invented in a hot second as well, but it kind of starts with the Stan Lee thing. Did any of you notice anything funny about or anything noteworthy, I guess, about the whole Stan Lee part in this, apart from the fact he looks so fucking young, it's ridiculous?
Yeah, I'm trying to rack my brain because I'm trying to go back like 12 years. I'm like, did I know who Stan Lee was 12 years ago?
Well, would you have 12 years ago when you?
Well, no, I don't think so. Not in the. I knew his voice because I remember playing Spider-Man on PS1. I'm like, that's the guy from Spider-Man on PS1. I was a dumb kid.
That's where that's actually, you say that as a joke, but I think that's actually where I recognized the first time I watched Mallrats. I had no idea what Stan Lee looked like. I knew the name Stan Lee that I got introduced to from the Spider-Man PS1 games, and I knew the voice of Stan Lee from the PS1 games. So you say that, but I think that's where I got it from as well, because he narrated that entire game. And that's the one where, oh no, that was Intro Electro. I think he did that one as well. But like, you'd pop onto a character onto a roof or whatever, and he'd just be like, and then Spider-Man meets up, blah, blah, blah. It's like, oh man, that's a whole different thing. But it's like the idea that Stan Lee was doing that stuff back in the day.
Yeah.
And like, he never touched any of those, the last like 10 years worth of Marvel games, from Spider-Man to X-Men games to even the most recent Spider-Man. Well, he had a cameo in it, but there was something real special about having those early ones, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, that would have been my first, that's what Stan Lee looks like moment as well. I would have known the name from watching, kind of Amazing Spider-Man or X-Men or something like that.
Yeah.
And just, I guess, seeing it in comics, but yeah.
Yeah, well, everyone saw it if you watched anything, because exactly right. If you watched anything like X-Men or whatever, it would have, at the end of every episode, I think he was a producer on all those as well, much like he was all the movies and stuff, but it would have also said based on characters created by Stan Lee, blah, 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 blah. So his name was everywhere. But yeah, most people, much like Brody, I guess, in the movie, just didn't know what he looked like because he wasn't plastered everywhere. And these days, it's kind of the same thing, I guess. Like, comic book creators, unless you're really into like following their works, and you can find them on Instagram, Twitter, or whatever to follow them. Comic book creators aren't like superstars still, apart from a select few. You have to hit like a level of stardom, kind of like Stan Lee did, I guess, to start being a superstar.
But even then, like, if you want to get deep into that, like, there's no one on the same level as Stan Lee. You can list a bunch of awesome names, like, Alex Ross, Greg, Scott Snyder.
Yeah.
Like Bendis, like, there are names you can pull out, and everyone's like, and even then, you might get away with, I've had a brain fart. The dude that wrote Sandman.
Neil Gaiman.
People are like, oh, that's like from the show on Amazon. I'm like, oh yeah, sure. You know what I mean? Like, there is no one like Stan Lee. There will never be anyone else like Stan Lee in terms of that breach between the comic book world and the real world, I guess.
Yeah, it's so funny because DC or Marvel fan, he always represented just the face of comics.
Yeah,
he, especially in the last couple of years, which I always found so funny. R.I.P. of course.
Of course, the Green Goblin showed up, and he pumpkin bombed the hell out of the place. But aside from that, it's pretty much the same thing.
Oh my God. Holy shit! Aren't you?
Oh, Stanley. Hi.
So the other thing I want to talk about that Kevin Smith invented before Marvel, and Marvel now everyone just says Marvel invented, obviously. He invented the interconnected movie series, whatever word you want to use for that these days, franchise thing. And Mallrats was a film that came out, and as I just said before, they have this whole scene at the start where they're talking about this funeral that they're going to and this sort of thing. That is the funeral that they go to in Clerks. Canon Mallrats actually takes place before Clerks, to work that all out. And then they mention a couple other characters, and I can't remember the character's name, but Willie.
I think Walt Flanagan gets mentioned as person. Yeah,
Walt Flanagan gets shouted out completely. It's like Walt Flanagan's dog or whatever. And then also like what's his name? Who's staring at the steamboat picture the entire time. He's actually playing a character from, I can't remember which one it is, but he's like the same character that's in Clerks, but it's like played by a different actor or something like that. Like there's heaps of names if you actually pay attention. There's a lot of crossover and stuff. And unless someone can find a really good another example, Kevin Smith with these movies created the first multi-film interconnected universe thing, whatever you want to call it, the viewer skew universe that we call it these days.
I think the most like, yeah, or not indirect. Well, no, because there is that theory that all Tarantino's movies are together as well, but you kind of have to pull at strings to put that together. But with Kevin Smith, it's very much direct references.
Yes, the thing with Tarantino's movies is that they have a couple really direct references. Like there's the Vega Brothers thing, which is Michael Madsen in Reservoir Dogs, and then John Travolta in Pulp Fiction. They're direct connected, but then Tarantino has this weird thing where it's like there's a level 1 universe, and then there's another universe which is basically the movies that the characters in these movies would watch, and they are connected somewhat. Where it's like, okay, so Kill Bill is a movie inside this other thing that these people would watch, and so on and so forth. But it's not just as openly connected as the viewer skew movies are. You could be like, oh, but some of these really obscure things like this character and stuff. It's like, it's not. The most obvious connecting factor for all the movies is obviously Jay and Silent Bob. That is the most obvious thing. That's the through line between all of them. And that's the one that everyone watching these movies will notice. Even if they're as dumb as a pair of rocks, you'll be like, oh, Jay and Silent Bob, they're in this movie, in this movie, in this movie. But then once you look past that, you can be like, oh, this character's played by a different actor. This character's the exact same, played by the same actor. They're mentioning this event that they've mentioned in this other movie. The fact that Mallrats ends with a teaser for Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back at which didn't happen for years later, obviously. So it's hard not to like see these things and be like, oh, Kevin was kind of drawing this whole universe without calling it a universe at the time, I'm sure. And in his mind, he was just creating a series of movies. But the thing that makes them so special is the fact that every single one of these movies, I was about to say without Jay and Silent Bob, but as I said before, Jay and Silent Bob was actually the first movie I watched, and I didn't get a lot of the references, but I still found it quite funny, I guess. So I think they actually all just work on their own. That's the thing about these movies. Every single one stands apart on its own. They're all got their own sort of genre. They're all comedic in some parts, but I think every one of these viewer skew movies is comedy done in a sort of different way. Some are more serious than others, of course, but they all have this connected through line to them. And everyone credits Marvel as creating the cinematic universe. Well, you're fucking wrong. You're wrong, of course. It's kind of crazy, really. And I can't think of any other examples. Apart from the Tarantino thing, the Kevin Smith thing, does anyone actually know of any other good examples?
Not really, no. People say that the ET in Star Wars are connected because the little ET
figures,
that's an Easter egg. That's an Easter egg.
They're in the Senate. I always think that's funny when people bring that up. But nothing that I can kind of,
especially not together. Back then either. You know what I mean? Like that far back.
No. Well, yeah. And the another thing is that it's not even easy to pull off well because fucking DC tried and failed.
One of the biggest companies of telling long ongoing stories.
Yeah, we'll just forget that and ignore the Universal Monsters reboot.
Fuck, that's actually
one movie in. Congratulations, you couldn't even beat DC.
Well, Power Rangers was supposed to be that too, wasn't it? But not like a internet universe, but like a big old franchise.
I don't know. Well, I suppose King Kong's doing it at the moment. You got King Kong plus Godzilla. Yeah. It's the most recent one that's actually happening. I'll give them that. It is happening. It's a
that's
thing.
a crossover. That's not a cinematic universe.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. We'll give it a pass there. And the other thing about the movies crossing over here is, and this continues throughout the rest of them as well, is the fact of getting actors bringing back his friends constantly just to play different roles throughout the whole movies. Of course, Brian O'Halloran playing the suitor.
Different Hicks, yeah.
Jesus Christ, Gil, there's just some questions you don't ask.
And he's really good. I got to be honest. I did not know that was actually him until many years after watching both Clerks and Mallrats. I never even noticed because I wasn't as astute. I don't know. I wasn't paying enough attention or whatever. But even just his delivery and he's got a mullet on or whatever the fuck he has going on. His costume's all different, but I never noticed at all, which is quite good. And of course,
shaved off. That's why.
Well, maybe that's it. And then another thing for this movie, actors, of course, is the Ben Affleck thing. I think if anyone knows anything about this movie and they know anything about Ben Affleck, I think it's hard not to think past this movie. This is where Kevin Smith and Ben Affleck's relationship starts, I guess, which, and that's got like a whole interesting thing with it where at the time, Ben Affleck wasn't a big superstar at all. They had sold, I think the story is like around the time they had just sold the script for Good Will Hunting or whatever it was around this point in time, and then he bumped into him on the Miramax lot or something like that and was like, hey man, how you going? Yeah, and they kicked it off and come be in my movie. And every time I watch this, I don't actually think Ben Affleck's good in this movie. I actually think his acting's quite average to bad in this movie.
He's not given a whole lot to work with either, but yeah, he's fine.
He isn't, but it's like, it's just so early in his career, I guess. And everyone looks young as well, but I just think he's
saying that though, like Jason Lee, this is, I think, first, if not second thing outside of being a professional skateboarder, and he's on point this whole movie.
Yeah, he really, but I mean, like, how much of that character is just not him? I don't know,
yeah.
He's not just playing himself, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, the Ben Affleck thing always gets me because, I guess people always think more about Chasing Amy when it comes to Kevin Smith's like relationship with him. And then, of course, you have Jersey Girl and stuff like that. But they had such a close relationship. And that's like a known thing to the point where Kevin Smith like brought his old house or whatever it was where he lives now and these sorts of things. And then they like died off and didn't talk for years and years and years until they got back together to do Jay and Silent Bob reboot that's coming out this year. So, but every time I go back and watch this movie, it's like when you watch like Nightmare on Elm Street or something. To me, I wouldn't say get off because that's a bad way to put it, but I always get super interested when I can find actors that are now like mega stars, like super, super Hollywood elite types. And I can go back and find them in like really obscure and random places. And every time I watch Nightmare on Elm Street and it's like Johnny Depp, are you kidding me? This is where this is where we're going back to find Johnny Depp
and Kevin Bacon in Friday the 13th.
Yeah, Kevin Bacon in Friday the 13th. You find all these actors in weird places and they always like start in like either horror movie. Well, I know this isn't Ben Affleck's first thing, but I consider it's like one of his first like notable things to me. As far as I'm concerned, he had a couple of bit parts before this, really. I think.
So it's one of those things like Michael Rooker's a big one as well. Like I didn't know who he was back then, and now I'm like, holy fuck, that's Yondu. Like obviously, I knew who he was before that, but like it's that weird line. If you go back, like it's great to see a lot of people that started in Kevin's movies, a handful of them sort of expand. You know what I mean? Like the reason I watched My Name is Earl because I knew Jason Lee from Mallrats.
From this.
You know what I mean? Yeah. And the fact that Ethan Suplee's in there as well. I'm like, double tick. And I guarantee they met on that set and they were like, later on when there was, a casting thing for My Name is Earl, like, yeah, I worked with him back in the day.
Well, I mean, yeah, up your resume somehow, I guess, like whatever works. Maybe it's not the best, like Mallrats isn't the best like thing to be selling people on. Like you worked on Mallrats? We're not the biggest fans of that, but it works out. So the only other thing I want to talk about here before we move on past this one is kind of like, as I said last week, I find it really interesting Kevin's mind space when he's making his movies, and I thought Clerks, the alternative ending to Clerks says something to me about his mind space at the time. And I think that Kevin's mind space for when he was making this movie, out of nearly all of his movies, apart from I would kind of put Clerks 2 up here, the same sort of thing, is like him at his most happiest, I guess. You know, like you can just feel it within the movie. It's kind of just about celebrating stuff and being just happy and joyful more about it. This one has the most, it's not really ever die. It's a pretty simple tale about a guy and a girl, and well, two guys and two girls, I guess. And
And a
it's the
pizza
most
place? No?
yeah, maybe. And then it's like, it's the most slapstick comedy out of all his movies as well, which I always find super interesting. And no matter how many times I watch this movie, and I have watched it quite a few times, every single time that they're entering the mall and Brody's doing that whole line, and the turns around and the freaking ladder or the construction equipment, whatever it is, smacks him in the face. Yeah, hits him straight to the ground. I'm like, that is such a like straight up slapstick joke. Even the part where Jane and Silent Bob are going for their first takedown of LaFour's, and Silent Bob's like getting a real swing going of the coins in a sock or whatever, and then the little kid pushes out the freaking roller skate thing, and then he like has the 1 foot, which is completely unrealistic, and like you're not going to like step onto that one roller skate and be like skating that far down the thing or whatever. But it's just like, I feel like it just kind of represents something about Kevin's mind space, or like how he was feeling at the time, because it's just such simple but joyful humor, which is kind of what led it to get bad reviews at the time. But it's also the reason I think it actually holds up really well, because that's what I'm saying. All of these slapstick jokes and these really simple jokes, simple to go as far as the fucking chocolate covered pretzel, which is another absolute golden nugget of cinema history here from this movie. And another thing I'll quite often say to people, and even if they don't know what it is, I'm like, would you like a chocolate covered pretzel? And like, you don't know what they're saying, but like that joke, all the slapstick jokes, it's like the reason this movie holds up so well to me is because of its simple humor, like very joyful humor. Do you feel the same, buddy?
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of almost feels like a stand-up set of Kevin Smith's delivering it over 90 minutes just through various different characters. And I agree about the reference as well, and kind of, you know, how it might have been panned because of that kind of slapstick nature. And now all the references and the quotability of the movie just like stand the test of time in the like pop culture lexicon or whatever. Yeah. So 100% agree with all of what you've just said there. It's just so the movie's just so quotable. I think my favorite part of the movie, and one I always laugh, like you were talking about how they enter the mall and hits the thing, and he's like, what the hell's going on here? One of my favorite moments is when he gets beaten up by Ben Affleck's character. Yeah. And then later on, Jay and Silent Bob see that, and they're like, who did this? He's the Easter Bunny. He says it with sarcasm. And then they beat the shit out of the Easter Bunny. And I just love that line. I use it quite often, like, this is for Brody. And then they start like laying into him. Like, it just feels like that kind of era's comedy. And I always think of someone like maybe like Chris Farley and the type of humor that he used to deliver. Falling down or that kind of stuff. It's something I've actually been quite critical of now, like that self-deprecating humor a bit now. But it's so funny that a lot of it's kind of in Mallrats that I would normally critique of so many other movies.
Yeah. Well,
so
what's different comparing a movie if you're reviewing it coming out now compared to, like,
yeah, but even watching an old movie, like, you watch Tommy Boy now, I'm like, they're making so many jokes at Chris Farley's expense.
About his weight and stuff.
About his weight.
Yeah, it's the whole,
fall down.
Like what Paul Blart is. Like, I hate that movie for that exact reason.
Do you think this movie is like full of like that same of self-deprecation though?
No,
really?
No, I don't. I feel like there are moments like that I could have had. I feel like it's in that same genre, but without the self-deprecation, if that makes sense. That's kind of same. That kind of humor was the slapstick fall down, the Saturday Night Live era when they're all doing movies.
Yeah, because it's like that with
it's a lot smarter than that though.
With a mix of like that sort of that trying to do that raunchy comedy, sort of like your Porky's, I guess. With the I guess you'd probably say like unnecessary boobs.
I would say they're unnecessary boob moment though. I guess at the time, like at the time, it's like you get boobs in it, you're probably going to get like you hit your R18 rating. The kids tell their friends, they go watch it simply to see the boobs, I guess. But yeah, these days it's like that's obviously not necessary. Everyone has access to the internet, and it just feels like a
Yeah, like that feels
It's
like
a
an
boob
80s
joke.
police academy sort of like level of
Yeah.
like, ooh. Because now, if I go back and watch Mallrats and like I see Joey Lauren Adams, I'm like, oh, this makes me actually feel quite uncomfortable because like I've seen what you've done since. I'm like, you don't need to do this. You're really good.
See, every time I go back and watch this and see her, I'm like, yeah, I did think you were Renee Zellweger for a good moment there.
It's funny though, because like there's like talking about like the messaging with the movie. I feel like for the most part, it kind of starts out with this whole the way they're going about telling the story and being like, yeah, fuck those girls. Like us bros, we just need each other. But then by the end of the movie, I wouldn't call it fucking Shakespeare, but it does have a level of like, you should do better for your girl, like the girlfriends in your life. You should try.
Yeah.
There is a little bit of like, it does at least say that the guys like put some fault on the guys, not super heavily, I'd say, but it does at least put some fault on them, which I wouldn't say was a super common thing for this type of movie at the time.
Well, that's the thing. Like Kevin Smith really brought in the bromance. Well, like, whether it be Clerks with Dante and Randall, whether it's TJ and Brody, or whether it's literally Banky and Holden and then like you go down, like he has created all Big Hunk for his movies are based on that bromance, and even acknowledging that is something that didn't really happen in those times either.
No, and now
like there is that entire movie with like Jason Segel, and this is a couple years old now, and Paul Rudd, like, I Love You Man.
I Love You Man. Yeah, that's
it. We're dudes, like we've got like bromance friends, like friends that we dudes that we're like big fans of, and like
and that movie does what I'm saying. I would say somewhat better. It's not better than this movie, but it does do the whole thing where it's like the dudes like they have has problem with his wife or girlfriend, whatever it is. I don't actually remember. But then he like gets with the dudes and he starts his whole bro romance. But then by the end of the movie, it isn't like, yeah, she was wrong. It's the dude does learn like he was the one fucking up, and like he does overcome a lesson, but he learns that lesson through his bromance, I guess, like which is kind of what this movie is. It's like you get the two dudes together, they go through the whole mole experience together, and then by the end of it, it does say somewhat. That's what I'm saying. It doesn't do it super well, but it's like they kind of come out the other ends by saying they did at least somewhat apologize for being douches at least a little bit.
And by doing so, it also demonstrated like because although like in terms of like the characters, like although neither Brody or TJ would TJ? No, it's not TJ. I've had a TS, thank you.
TS.
So although neither of them would express that they're emotionally hurt, like, but it's this, underlying they're there for each other, or whether that just be going to the mall and hanging out with each other and just like talking shit with each other. It's like, it's one of those things, if you break it down that little bit further, you look at it and you're like, no, these are two dudes, like two really good friends sort of there for each other. And I don't know, I love, like I said, the more you analyze Kevin Smith stuff, you get that kind of sense. And like, I can't wait to talk about Clerks 2, because Clerks 2 has such a personal story for me and based around that sort of dynamic.
Well, I would say like that Kevin Smith himself, as he got older and he got more emotional and he got better at being he got better at being with his emotions and like talking about them and whatever, especially when he started podcasting, even to this day. Like I can't even imagine. I'm gonna say I'd put bets at Jane Silent Bob reboot at maybe probably tears me up at some point, just knowing like what Kevin's like these parts. I would put that bet out there. But with this movie, he doesn't hit the strike out there. And that's maybe because at the time he was a very young person. But as we talk about the rest of his movies, you will see as they go through, he gets better at writing these characters and their emotions, because I think him as a person gets better at writing characters dealing with their emotions and so on and so forth. And as you say, I think I know what you're kind of talking about with Clerks 2, but Clerks 2 has a lot more like people just talking about their feelings. Like who'd have thought of it? Like, it's a crazy concept. Yeah, this film's kind of like the start, and you can see this growth. But that's one thing I really love about all these movies is I like older movies. I think that all of the Askew movies are great, but I just think as watching a director grow, I honestly can't think of a better series of movies where you can just pinpoint a director's growth as a person. Yeah. Not only as a filmmaker, but as a literal person in life, growing and experiencing and changing. Like there's nothing else.
Gee, my take on some of these movies that are coming up are going to be very interesting.
You reckon?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Specifically with Dogma and Clerks 2.
Oh shit! All right, we're gonna have fun.
Yeah,
We're really gonna have
yeah,
fun
we're
in
gonna-
Clerks too. I can already feel it.
Subscribe to this podcast now to make sure you don't miss out, buddies.
But I agree what you're saying about the effort and how they're putting the fault on the gentleman in the relationship, and it's weird. They kind of both kind of give up, and that's kind of addressed in TS's situation when he's on the game show. Like, you just went to your mate's house and you didn't even come after me. Where, you know, maybe if you'd done that, there was no Mallrats movie because they would have resolved their situation right there and then. It's weird that they kind of give up and just go hang out, and then all of a sudden they see them again, I guess, and this kind of reinvigorates their love or
See, like
their true feelings.
I agree with that because that is true. They they didn't do the chase or whatever, and it's the fault is there, but that's them processing. That's them working it out.
Yeah, and it's just weird because what really changed for them? What did TS do? Like, he admitted his feelings again, but what's to, they get married. What's to say they don't have this breakup stuff happen again? And apart from, Brody just getting suddenly discovered, was he really going to turn his life around? Like, you know what I mean? Did they ever actually grow as people, or did they just no?
That's
let's
what
get back together. And
that's
give
what
it
I'm
another
saying.
crack?
Like, you see hints of that, but that's what I'm saying. I don't think it's done very well. But like, even just the fact of him being like, "Hey, do you want to come around tomorrow night and meet my mother?" That's like your growth.
Yes,
there.
yeah,
it's
that's
not.
right.
It's not very. It's not. If I was watching this movie today and that was the top level of character growth I got for this entire movie's arc, I would probably be reviewing it quite poorly. But that's not the way I'm looking at it, obviously. And I think knowing that's there, I'm like, well, he did at least have that character acknowledge and say something, which is what that line is for. It's like the character has grown at least.
Yeah, and but it's one of those situations of that's a lot for this guy. For this one person, that is a lot.
Yeah, I mean, you watch the whole movie for that. Yeah, for Brody, it's probably a big deal considering they talk about how they've been dating for 6 years. I don't know, many years, and never sneaking in and out every night. I guess so. Yeah, it's a big deal to have him meet.
And it's so funny that he so much loathes Ben Affleck's character, fashionable male, but it's Ben Affleck's character that gives him the life lesson. Like, he's already introduced me to my mother. I'm like, oh, really? Oh, so this guy's an arsehole, but he's done that already? Oh, okay. Maybe his motives were different, but maybe I can take a lesson from this.
But it's like, she loves him, and she says that much at the end. It's like, oh, what can I say? I love the fucking dog. But it's just she needs that little bit more from him, I guess, is the thing. It's like, she doesn't want him to change. She doesn't want him to be fashionable male. She loves him as the comic book loving dork that he is. But she just wants an actual fucking relationship with certain things to change, So it's not one of these movies where it's like, the nerdy guy must give up and sell all of his things and stop playing video games. That's not the message I feel it's going for. It's just it's time to fucking grow up at least a little bit, dude. Step up to the plate here. She's not asking you to change.
Probably shouldn't be confessing this, but I see so much of myself in Brody in that regard. And even with my wife, Kim, now, but she was just so such an adult and have a career driven and everything. And I am not that. So every now and then I felt like it was me, just needing a little bit of a push, come on. Just a little bit.
I feel like everyone
more.
needs that though. It's the same sort of thing. And I think we've had this conversation probably a little bit about when you want to buy things and you want someone to talk to. Whenever I've been in a relationship, it's I want to buy this thing, but I just want to tell you, it's on special, and if I don't get it now, you just think, you know what I mean?
I've had that conversation so many times.
Yeah, and that I do that. I want to do that for all important things. If I was to do anything in my life, I'd be I just want to talk through this. And it's not because I don't trust myself, but it's just I feel like old people in general need a little bit of reinsurance at times, and a little bit of push in the right direction, or whatever. So I don't feel like it's super bad to not be super independent, that you don't need any help at all. I feel like that's a rarity. I feel like most people need a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just about identifying that and accepting yes, I do
need the help.
I'm not the best at sharing my feelings, but I know they're in there. I'm I'll try my best.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly. And I mean, if you want to look at this character does grow throughout the rest of the movies and kind of cameo appearances, I guess.
We never see TS again.
No.
But obviously we see Brody.
I don't know if he's referenced, not from memory. Maybe I'll keep my ears out, I guess. But I mean, you could at least note that Brody as a character successfully, even if he was to judge solely off Mallrats, it's like he goes and hosts a game show where he sets his girlfriend up with a nice job as the lead player of the drums.
Band, yeah.
It's like, if you were to just judge solely off how this movie wraps things up, you're like, well, he gets pretty fucking successful, and he helps out his girlfriend there, like meets the mother. Yeah, everything's great. Like, in fact, if I judge solely off the ending, the fact that every time I see this and I see that TS still gets married over the fucking Jaws jumping over thing, I'm like, nah, dude. Like,
Ron, that's the most romantic thing we've ever heard.
Nah, dude.
Once again, another Jaws reference in a Kevin Smith
movie, yeah. Everyone. Oh, what if there's one every movie, and I've just never picked up on the fact that there's a Jaws reference every movie? I have to keep my ears and eyes open before the next episode. Well, I think that'll do it for this week's episode of Radio Movies. Please be sure to take any trash with you when leaving your area. Dump it in the bins and leave the store accordingly. You can find Buddy Watson over at dashgamer.com on the Dash Culture podcast every fortnight, talking about pop culture, movies, and gaming. And be sure to follow him on Twitter at BuddyWatson12. You can find Ryan Betson over at youtube.com/thepopculturist, talking all things PlayStation on For the Players and wrestling on The Young and the Wrestlers. Follow him on Twitter at HaggardMC. And you can find myself right here on ExplosionNetwork.com and one of our many games, TV, or movies, games, or TV podcasts like Arcade Couch or What Do You Want to Watch? You can follow me on Twitter at Vivaladil, VIVALADIL. Please be sure to review this podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to, if it allows you to actually review podcasts, or go and tweet Kevin Smith and Jason Mewes. Tell them about the podcast so we can get sent an early copy of Jay and Silent Bob Reboot. Make it happen. We need a hashtag, really. Hashtag.
This is the whole reason you're doing this, isn't it?
I mean, no, but it could be a very high second reason to be doing this, that's for sure.
That's 86% the reason.
86% the reason, yeah, for sure. Until next week, we will be watching Chasing Amy. Is the next one,
That's
right?
correct.
Chasing Amy.
Yeah, Chasing Amy. We'll be watching Chasing Amy next week, so do your homework, everyone. Watch that movie and come back next week to hear us discuss that one and our memories, thoughts, and whatever we have to say about that one. Snitchy Boochies.
Come, son of Jarrell, kneel before Zod!